The reason for the format is clear. And even though we are together virtually, the sentiments that we have for one another, the rabbis as communal leaders and all of us as part of our extraordinary Great Neck community are very real indeed. So we are glad that you're joining us for what we all believe is an extremely important conversation that we're going to be having with one another this morning. To start off our program, I am very honored to call upon the co-president of Temple Israel's Men's Club, Michael Becker, who will say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi Stecker. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Becker, and I'm the co-president of the Temple Israel Great Neck Men's Club. We as an organization have been speaking about physically hosting this incredibly special event since September, and I'm thrilled that the rabbis from various synagogues in our community agreed to come together virtually for a dialogue that couldn't be timelier as we begin to explore in our own ways what the new normal may look like. As you all know well, we in Great Neck, like so many other communities on Long Island and the tri-state area, are resilient. We've adapted to our environment rapidly and have shown tremendous kavod, or honor and respect, across our community in how we have begun to worship differently and interpret Jewish laws, made particularly more meaningful on the heels of Shavuos. We have shown kavod in appreciation of our first responders and frontline workers. We have shown kavod in ensuring those who are isolated and are in need feel less so and are provided for. We have shown kavod in applauding our high school seniors to ensure their accomplishments are not forgotten. We have shown kavod and patience for parents that are navigating a new paradigm of work-life balance, particularly with the education landscape altered so dramatically. And we have shown kavod for one another in respecting new boundaries, halakhically, physically, and personally. Before handing the meeting over to Rabbi Stecker from Temple Israel, please allow me to recognize and thank several members of the Temple Israel Men's Club leadership team for ensuring this event occurred, including Mark Langsner, Mark Katz, Steve Smolinski, Harold Citron, and Ezra Casson. We would also like to thank Temple Israel's office staff and its executive director, Jamie Cohen, Rabbis Stecker and Schweber, members of the media who have graciously agreed to join us today, and our partner men's clubs and brotherhoods at Great Neck Synagogue, Young Israel of Great Neck, and Temple Bethel of Great Neck. Just as our ancestors and our neshamas stood together at the base of Mount Sinai, let us all come together again in kavod, strength, and good health as we navigate this pandemic. Thank you. Rabbi Stecker, over to you.
Michael, thank you so much for that beautiful, concise, and very meaningful introduction and welcome. And thank you for the leadership that you and Ezra and the other leaders of our men's club have been bringing all year round, and especially during this difficult crisis. I am honored and really very warmly pleased to be able to welcome my colleagues, Rabbi Meir Feldman and Rabbi Tara Feldman of Temple Bethel, Rabbi Yaakov Lerner of Young Israel of Great Neck, and Rabbi Dale Polikoff of Great Neck Synagogue. Months ago, when we were all sitting together in the same space, seems so nostalgic to think back on that. We were planning for this dialogue, and we were exploring the question of how we can encourage civil and productive conversation in an atmosphere which we all believed was growing increasingly partisan and rancorous. And then around Purim, we found ourselves entering the COVID crisis, which we're still very much confronting. Shortly after Pesach, we reconvened through virtual means, and we decided that we needed very much to come together as we always do, but to come together and to discuss the repercussions, the ramifications of this crisis that we all find ourselves in, the challenges that it has imposed, our reactions, ways that it has impacted our feeling and our thinking about community, about leadership, about the role of the rabbi, the role of the synagogue, and so many more things. So here we are, with all of the emotions and thoughts that are swirling around, so much to confront day to day, and also so much to think about in terms of the future. I want to, before we get into the conversation, wish comfort and strength to those families who have lost loved ones to this illness, and comfort and strength to those who have lost loved ones to other causes. And all of the mourners have been unable to mourn with the in-person comfort of family and friends that our tradition ordinarily mandates. I want to wish refuah shlema, full recovery, to all those who have suffered and are suffering from this illness, and to all those who are suffering physical and spiritual pain of any kind. And I want to acknowledge and thank all healthcare workers, first responders, all those providing essential services at personal risk. So now to enter into our conversation. First, the format. I will be serving as moderator, and I'll also be responding to the questions. I'm going to ask two basic questions of my colleagues, which I, of course, will also answer. And for each, we'll have opportunities for follow-up and for asking each other for clarification and further consideration. And then we're going to take some questions from the community. So if you have a question that you would like to address to us, to any of the rabbis, or to all of us, we ask that you email it to Rabbi Schweber, my wonderful colleague at Temple Israel. And this is his email address. So if you have a question, please email to Rabbi Schweber at tign.org. We're only going to be able to answer a few questions, but please do feel free to share your questions with us. So now to jump into the conversation. Clearly, this entire COVID situation has imposed challenges on us that we were not able to anticipate and possibly even to imagine. And I want to ask each of us to share a particular challenge that this situation has imposed, whether that be professional or personal, or perhaps an overlap. And in addition to sharing the challenge, to also share how you and or your community have responded to this challenge. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, beginning with Rabbi Meir Feldman.
Actually, we just had a little rabbinic council, and I'll go first.
Okay.
Ladies first.
With pleasure.
I think as I'm about to start, I hear the sirens that go off in our town, and that seems very appropriate metaphor for the challenge. This is a time of urgency, and I feel that the synagogue and my rabbinate is sort of under a magnifying glass. People are in need. People are seeking leadership. They're seeking community and guidance and connection. And the synagogue and our rabbinate must be meeting them. I'm also worried that we are now not connecting with the brick and mortar building. So God willing, when this pandemic is over and we can reconvene, will people need the synagogue? Will they see its relevance? Will they felt they have been met? So there is a sense of absolutely needing to step up and to step up in the right ways. So then we're back to the magnifying glass moment. I think that we have had to make very quick decisions on a whole range of issues, policy issues. What are we going to say yes to? What are we going to say no to? I came into the rabbinate to be present for people. How can I be there for people in their moment of need without endangering myself or my family? So in moments of having to really make decisions that affect the entire community quickly and morally and correctly, that has been a magnifying glass moment. Another element of the spotlight or magnifying glass has been the Zoom fatigue. We're doing everything as we are now. And it's not only that we have to watch our own faces on these screens as we are delivering a Devar Torah or presiding over a Shiva minyan, but it's that we can't see those who are receiving our words. They could just be a name on a screen. So the Zoom fatigue is another way in which I feel very much that I am in the spotlight and must respond quickly and appropriately. And in the last challenge for me has been that, at least we are always virtually available, but we can go home. And now we need to be available for people at every moment and want to, but how can we draw the boundaries that can keep us restored? And so I think I've been amazed by the community's resilience and creativity, and even my own ability to be there for people virtually. And so more later, but the experience of having to embrace these challenges and lean into them has left me with a sense that my incredible community, the staff, the lay leadership, and even my own co-clergy, we've all leaned in, and we can respond, and we are responding with greater resilience and creativity than I really thought possible, honestly.
Thank you.
That was more than my minute and a half, sorry.
Please, yeah, if you, by all means.
Sure, I think I'll add just two things briefly. One is my deepest instinct is to hug. And at Temple Bethel, there's kind of a, mayor will hug you. And so it's profoundly challenging. We just had a visit with my sister who lives in the sort of Cherry Hill, New Jersey area, and brother, sister, and we met social distance. So bizarre to get together, but to not hug each other. Bizarre. That's one thing. The other thing is, having just come off of Shavuot, this idea, K'ish echad lev echad, that we were like, somehow we earned the zachut, the privilege of standing and hearing God's voice because we were like one person, one heart. So for me, it's a huge challenge that I have a lot of fear that as a Jewish community, and for sure as a national community, that we are not moving in the right direction. It feels so profoundly worrisome to me.
Okay, I think there's a lot to follow up on. Thank you both for your candid and heartfelt sharing. Let's move on to Rabbi Lerner, please.
The backbone of an Orthodox shul, as we all know, is the idea that there's constant minyanim. You have 2 minyanim every morning. There's learning that goes on already from 6:10 in the morning every day that I've been doing for decades. And there's shiurim that take place later in the morning. The shiurim usually later in the afternoon. At some point, certainly between Mincha Mariv, and then shiurim at night. And the fact that all of that has been snatched away from us itself is really very, very disturbing. It like pulls the rug out from under us and makes us feel completely isolated. And so certainly that sense of what a shul is as a place for Pesach Knesset, it's the place for all the people to come together. Knesset is like a gathering, a huge gathering of people that has been completely, completely robbed from us. And that is very, very painful for me and so many of the congregants who have spoken to me. On the other hand, I have to say that there has been something that to me is very, very powerful, that in a very, very meaningful way has stepped in and replaced it. The extraordinary amount of what we would refer to as concern for others, or the way Rabbi Akiva termed it, v'ahavta l'yacha kamocha, zeklal gadol b'Torah, to love others, to worry about others, to be there for others, is even more important than having minyanim for davening, than having shiurim for learning. The amount of chesed that we have seen in these months, since the end of February, beginning of March, where people are constantly forming WhatsApp groups to find out about specific individuals that they know are alone, widows and widowers, people who are somewhat ill or elderly. Do they need things for shopping? Do we need to help them out in other ways, to come possibly with social distancing just to be able to visit them? There are untold myriads of opportunities that present themselves to us now that in normal times, when the shul is the gathering place and the routine is the normal routine, we don't think so much about. We're not so worried about one another. But now we have been forced to take that stance, not just because we're looking to replace it, because that is the essence, as Rabbi Akiva taught us, of what Judaism is all about. And so it's true that we don't have the shul, and very painful for us, and we can't wait, counting down to the days when finally things may hopefully return to normal. We have no idea of when. Things in Eretz Yisrael, I have 3 of my 4 daughters living, return to normal, and then there was a big surge even there. And so it's very dangerous. And there are a lot of communities we know where they're pushing for minyanim. They feel that they're so super firm and they need to have the minyan. And the fact is that in the eyes of Hashem and expressly written into the Torah, Nishmartem la'od l'nafsho seichem. You should exceedingly guard your life. Your life and the life of others is the number one priority that Hashem charges us with. The mitzvah pikuach nefesh of saving the life takes precedence over every mitzvah in the Torah except for the 3 cardinal sins of murder, incest, and of idol worship, abandoning Judaism. And so we are involved now in a tremendous sense of trying to realize what the real priorities are. We can't wait for this to pass. We pray with tremendous fervor in our hearts that there shouldn't be any more terrible tragedies. We've experienced so many of them in our community and other communities. Younger people that Abby and I know that we have lost, incredible doctors who were there to serve others. I'm thinking particularly of an amazing pulmonologist from Rochelle who passed away because of COVID, right? Incredible, incredible loss. And it's very, very painful. But the most important for us to know is that we can still be incredibly devoted Jews to one another, to watch out for each other. I have a neighbor, Joey Cohen, who's right next door to me, who is a tzaddik. He reached out to an elderly family that we know for many years on our street in Essex Road. He's constantly shopping for them. We passed them as we were going for a walk a day or two ago, and the husband said to me, "You can't even imagine what Joey Cohen has done for us." He's just a wonderful person, simple Jew, just acting like an angel. And so we can't do the tefillos, we can't do the shiurim, and with the Zoom, we're going a little bit crazy. But the fact is that the most important mitzvah is very much more accessible to all of us. And that's what we have to focus on. And hopefully in the merit of fulfilling that mitzvah in a higher way than we probably ever have, that Hashem will have mercy on all of us and get us past this catastrophe.
Oh, Yishar, thank you, Rabbi Lerner. Very powerful to hear your sentiments and the way that you expressed them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rabbi Polakov, the Chavod.
So good morning, everyone, and it's nice to be able to be together with you, at least virtually, in this morning's session. I think we wanted to focus on in this first round on some of the challenges that we've faced in our rabbinates, in our communities. And I want to join with both Rabbi Lerner and Rabbis Feldman to share that sense that one of the most challenging aspects of this crisis has been the distance that has been created between people. The distance that's been created between people in a ritual sense, and the distance that's been created between people in a social sense, in a sense of just being able to be there for each other. And yes, I agree with Rabbi Lerner, a tremendous amount of chesed has been done. But despite that chesed, there is still a sense of disconnect, still a sense of not feeling that I have the ability to connect to someone else, to connect to someone, to my next door neighbor, to connect to my friend on the block, to connect to my family. I think that challenge of feeling disconnected created a significant, one of many significant halachic challenges. We just celebrated Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, and fascinatingly enough, the bracha that we recite when getting an aliyah is a bracha acknowledging Hashem as a nosein haTorah. The bracha actually changes tense from nasan, that Hashem gave us the Torah, to in its conclusion, nosein haTorah. That Kadosh Baruch Hu consistently and constantly gives us a Torah. That the Torah is something that is applicable to every age and every situation and every circumstance in which we as a Jewish community live. And therefore, it's particularly enlightening and heartening to see how the Torah, through our poskim, has been able to meet the challenges of many of the challenges of this COVID pandemic. But it's also, I would say, a bit humbling to understand that our Torah and our poskim are able to hold the line and not allow the COVID pandemic to wreak havoc with the Torah. I'll give you an example, a particular example. I'm sure that many of you were aware of, as Pesach approached, of the phenomenon known as the Zoom Seder. Some of you might even have participated in a Zoom Seder, in which families across the country, across the world, even across the neighborhood, came together at their Pesach Sedarim and connected with others through Zoom. So from an Orthodox perspective, that was not something that was accepted by our poskim. It was not something that we were allowed to do. And yes, I will tell you that as a community, in following that directive of our poskim, not to engage in Zoom Sedarim, we created a certain sense of vulnerability of people. So much so that I will tell you, for the first time ever in my life, I kept my cell phone on throughout Yom Tov in case a congregant would feel a need to call, because they felt isolated, because they felt alone, because they felt that they were in some way vulnerable. I kept my cell phone on knowing that I would answer that call if that call came in, because it was a matter of pikuach nefesh. But to explain to congregants how, despite technology, despite all of the advances that we have, there's a certain connection in halacha that defies technology and that can only be found when we are in the presence of each other, whether that's a minyan, whether that's a Pesach Seder, whether that's a prohibition of technology on Yom Tov and Shabbos. These are some of the challenges that I think many of my colleagues have been struggling with during this time of the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Rabbi Polikoff. So I'm going to just share. There have been numerous challenges, and I don't have to repeat, but I certainly say amen to much of what my colleagues shared in terms of the challenge of feeling responsible in this moment, to be responsive to all of the pain and all of the disharmony within people's lives and within the synagogue, trying to connect to people. I'm finding now that there's an interesting challenge that's emerging as we're starting to think about the future. And I think many of us are finding that we're receiving messages from various people, some of which are pulling in different directions. So I actually saw an interesting depiction of a pastor of another faith who was sitting in the middle in this depiction, and around him are all of these bubbles of people saying different things. So one person is saying, we have to get back together again. We can't stand the isolation. And another bubble is saying, my loved one died from this, and how dare you let us get back together before it's completely safe. And someone says, I'm bored of Zoom, and my children are, they need to be back together again. And all of these different bubbles, and the truth is, whether it's a pastor or an imam or a rabbi, we're all feeling a lot of the pushes and pulls. And I would argue that many of us have ambivalence within ourselves about what we would like to see. We certainly want to be back together. We crave being back together, having a conversation at a kiddush, giving somebody a proper in-person greeting, which is very different than wishing somebody well over Zoom. But at the same time, echoing what Rabbi Lerner said, the overriding principle of pikuach nefesh, which is to preserve life at almost all costs, is something which resounds within each of us. So how are we managing that? We are trying to solicit different perspectives from different people. We are trying to come together to think about what we might be able to do slowly in ways that are safe, to try to transition back to what I'll call a more normal situation. But it's extremely hard, and it's wearying to try to figure that out, because you hear the various perspectives and you have to acknowledge your own ambivalent feelings throughout all of this. One of the things that I named is that in addition to subservient to the concept of pikuach nefesh, we want to figure out how to deploy our resources for the sake of the community. So we only have so many resources. Rabbis like to think that we're rabbis and we can do this and we can do that, and there's much that we can do, but we are bnei adam, we are human. We have limited resources, the congregation does. So how are we going to use our resources to best fulfill the vision of engagement? And that's complicated. We're going to now open it up. And I want to respond to something that Rabbi Polakov said. And perhaps this could be fruit for some conversation. So our congregation had not used electronics. We had not done Zoom minions. We had not even streamlined services, which some might say arguably we should have been doing before for various reasons. Mostly that there are people who are isolated, who cannot be part of the kehillah for one reason or another. And I will say, as JTS ordained rabbi, conservative rabbi connected with the Rabbinical Assembly, for me, this was not a slam dunk. It was not something that I thought about cavalierly whatsoever. And the cheshbonot, the considerations that went through my mind were, what are the pros and the cons of not having tefillah, of not having seder that's shared, which is a very important part of all of our communities. And the determination that I made was that on balance, it would be preferable to give people the opportunity to come together through these means for tefillah. Now, many people have said that they have found it very comforting to be able to say Kaddish in this context, to feel that they were connected, albeit not the same as an in-person connection on Passover and at other times. The Rabbinical Assembly did actually issue a teshuvah, talking about a rabbinic responsum, identifying guidelines that one should observe. And I just want to say that for me, this is not easy. And I hope that I bring a certain humility that my colleagues across the denominational spectrum who made different decisions, I respect enormously and believe that they made these decisions based on their own personal integrity and their own sense of what should be. Many of us reached different conclusions. I think that that's part of the complexity of all of this, to be thoughtful, to reach the conclusion that you feel is right, and hopefully to have the anava, the humility, to recognize that it might not be a perfect solution, and that other diverging decisions come from a place of absolute integrity and concern for our tradition and also for our people. So would anybody else like to address that further? And then I identified a few other things that I think would be helpful to get back to, some statements that I think require further elucidation. So I'm going to first give the opportunity for my colleagues to address.
I have a question, but I didn't know. Rabbi Lerner, did you want to, were you going to say?
No, go ahead. Hey.
Yeah, I could ask a question. Just again, thinking about reflecting on Shavuot, where we read, beginning of chapter 19, Vayachanu b'midbar, vayichan sham. We go from, the kind of arguing through Rashi, this group of Jews are always arguing and get claims against each other, vayichan sham. We were one. And Rashi, ka'ish echad lev echad. So my question is this: did Rashi mean this? Is this ka'ish echad lev echad? What's happening here, or is it something else?
An easy question to answer. I don't know. I'm not sure how to explain it. The fact that it has such a horrible, catastrophic, crisis that takes so many lives, as we've spoken about, is certainly not tied into the joyous Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, which was pure joy, that the unity of the Jewish people, that they were all together. I understand Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad is that the experience was so powerful that it sank so deeply into their hearts and they were all on the same wavelength. And it's very, very interesting that when you go all the way back about 140 years ago to the Orthodox community in Germany, which was headed by the very, very famous and extraordinarily, prolific author of Samson Raphael Hirsch, Samson Raphael Hirsch, he made a statement. Actually got a whole long quote of that statement. It's usually just quoted in one line, that if it was up to him, he would shut down all the Orthodox shuls in Germany with an extended period of time. He felt that the shuls had become more like social centers, worship areas, as we full and say, and that the real foundation of Jewish life and the real ultimate engine that drives the continuity of Jewish life is not the synagogue, it's the home, it's the parents, it's the role modeling that's done by the parents, it's the atmosphere that they create, it's the values that they generate, it's the teachings that they impart. And he felt that because people have come to rely on institutions to get others to broker it for them, it makes it so easy for parents, I'm a member of a synagogue and I pay tuition bills if I send them to Talmud Torah or to private yeshivas and so on. And so there's not so much pressure on me. And the fact is, with all the kids home now, with all the parents who have their younger children home or their even high school children home, it really had the opportunity, and I don't know how much of this potential was met, to really provide that which Hashem taught us in the Torah. And the Torah doesn't speak about hiring the Rebbe, getting the teacher, getting the brilliant professor and the higher grades. It talks about V'shinantam levanecha, v'imadatam osam es b'nechem, the two major chapters of the Shema, that the real obligation is for parents to impart their love, their passion, their idealism, their incredibly deep beliefs that they sincerely embrace. And so this is really exactly what he, God forbid, without it being a pandemic, was hoping. Let's forget about the shuls. Just shut down the shuls, not because of sickness. Shut down the shuls so that the people at home, the parents at home, realize what their job is. And so taken with the right attitude, it could be a golden opportunity. I don't know how many people have taken the right attitude. I wonder what would have happened if this happened 15 years ago when our kids were still young and not out of the house and all married with their own children. But really, the idea that you have parents and children and you're there and you're cooped up there and you're afraid to venture outside is exactly what Hashem wants, is to be parents and to be parents who are role models and parents who are teachers and parents who impart with tremendous excitement and enthusiasm their heritage to the children. And so we have to realize that there could have been a golden or silver lining to this if it would have been utilized properly. I don't know how many people have. I'm sure there are many who have, but many others who perhaps let the opportunity slip through their fingers.
Right. So I just want to thank you, Rabbi Lerner. A friend of mine who has, a kind of a dry sense of humor, he would describe the vacation time when he and his children were together as quantity time with his children. So he believed, of course, that there was quality time as well, but that was just his way of saying that, sometimes when you're all together and it's more time than you might have originally bargained for, our children are also, they came back to the house, but they are out of the house in terms of phase of life. But for parents who are with small children, I know that this has been wearying at times. In addition to the beautiful interactions, it's also been trying. Anybody else wants to address the notion which Rabbi Tara Feldman spoke about? Will people still think synagogues are relevant? Any thoughts? I think that's a very profound question that we're all struggling with. What are we seeing? Are we becoming more relevant, less relevant, differently relevant? Does anyone want to address that? And then perhaps we'll move on to the second question.
So if I can take a stab at that.
Please.
Tara, I think it's a great question and we all struggle with it. I like to just reflect on something that Rabbi Lerner just said, namely, do we believe that when this pandemic is over, that people will take the new normal and bring it with them into the newly emerging world? Mm-hmm. I'll share with you just a very personal example of this, and that is that although we don't use Zoom on Shabbos or Yom Tov, We do use Zoom every other day of the week, and we have virtual groups coming together to daven. It's not a minyan. We don't say Kaddish. We don't say Dvarim Shebekidusha, but we try in this way to create a sense of community that focuses around tefillah. So it's important from that perspective. I found it very meaningful. I find it very meaningful to touch base with people in the morning. How are you? How was your Shabbos? How was your Yom Tov? How's your family? You know, almost as much as the tefillah component is the social interaction component. But for me, the best time is actually on Shabbos and Yom Tov, where my computer is shut off, where Zoom doesn't exist, where I can sit and daven. And I have to tell you that normally Psuke de Zimra at Great Neck Synagogue, I don't know about any of your other synagogues, but we start at 9 o'clock. And if you're not done Psuke de Zimra at 9:20, so there's already a rumbling in the crowd. I have, since this pandemic, not once davened Psuke de Zimra in 20 minutes. Taking my time, going through it, looking at words that perhaps I have never seen before. I mean, I've seen that, but perhaps I've never reflected on them. I've never thought about them. Trying to understand the depths of what these Tehillim meant that David HaMelech and others wrote. For me to be able to daven Shmona Esrei on Shabbos morning, or on Yom Tov morning, or on Friday night, or in the Shabbos afternoon, without having to worry that there's an entire congregation at my back looking at their watches, wondering when the rabbi is going to be finished, or worse, looking at their phones, checking their emails because the rabbi is not finished, it takes a tremendous burden off of my shoulders. But I'm fearful of one other thing, and that is one of my favorite Zoom technologies is the mute button. That when we're all davening together, I can just hit mute all, and everybody is quiet. It's a wonderful world in which to daven. I've joked with my congregants that it would be nice to bring the mute button back into real life when we return to shuls, to which they've responded, our favorite button is the leave meeting button that we like to bring back to shuls as well. But the silence of being able to daven without people talking, without being disturbed, to me has been very special and very meaningful. I'm fearful that when we get back to the brick and mortar buildings, which I believe that we will, and I believe we will, Rabbi Feldman, because it represents an element that we can't get over Zoom. It's an element of connecting with each other, whether it's being hugged by Rabbi Meir, whether it's schmoozing at Kiddush, whether it's eating that terrible food that we serve each and every Shabbos. Whatever it is, there is an element of connection that Zoom can't replace. So we will get back, I believe, to those brick and mortar buildings. Might it be with fewer members? It might be. Might it take us some time to rebuild? I certainly think that it will. Might this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur look different than it has looked in any of our memories? I believe that it will. But I think we will get back. My fear is that we will, when we do get back, it won't be a new normal, but it will be the old normal. It will be despite the lessons that we've learned, despite the gains that we've made. And to me, it's fearful that we will have lost, as Rabbi Lerner said, this silver lining in this very, very heavy and weighty cloud.
So Rabbi Polikoff, I want to thank you. I mean, all of my colleagues. First, I mean this. It's such a pleasure to be with colleagues as you are speaking honestly and forthrightly. I think so often rabbis and other community leaders feel like they have to appear a certain way, and to actually be able to share, honestly, some of the frustration. What does it mean to try to maintain a personal spiritual life as a community leader? That's a really important question that you referred to, Rabbi Polikoff. What does it mean to question the underpinnings of what it is that we're doing. What's the main purpose of it? And to hear you reflect on that honestly, that there are elements of interpersonal connection that matter, if anything, more than some of the other things that we preoccupy ourselves with. So I'm going to transition into the second question, which really is, we're going to have just a little bit of time to reflect on, less than we did for the first one. And that second question is in the more positive frame. What is something positive that has come out of this experience? Is there a bracha, a blessing that we have experienced? Is there an insight? Is there a ray of hope? Is there something that we think might actually impact, if I can paraphrase Rabbi Polikoff, the normal of our situations moving forward? So I'll begin, because we'll go in reverse alphabetical. And I have experienced a coming together of people who might not necessarily have been so mindful of each other. So people being more mindful of those in certain service professions, people being more mindful of those who are involved in procuring and producing food and other necessities. Also, people being mindful of those from other communities. I participated in a panel that was sponsored by the Holocaust Tolerance Museum and Center that involved Jewish leaders and also leaders in the Asian community, because what we discovered is that one of the outcomes of this pandemic is that Jews, Jewish Americans, and Asian Americans are being targeted as being responsible for this in some way or another. And leaving aside all of the details of that, this was actually an opportunity for me to be in conversation with people, some of whom I actually didn't know. So that's been a blessing, to uncover certain connections that I might not otherwise have been mindful of. And what I want to say in that regard, before I quickly pass it on, Rabbi Polikoff, you said, who knows what the normal is going to be? You fear that we might not be able to bring some of these insights. I think you're absolutely right. I think that when people say, when this is over, we're all going to be better people, we're all going to be kinder, we're all going to practice more chesed, my response to that is only if we choose to. It is up to us whether or not we behave differently. I mean, our ancestors experienced Yetziat Mitzrayim, and instead of saying, hey, we got out of Egypt, you get out of Egypt, instead, they used their experience of vulnerability and marginalization to encourage them to be more sensitive to others who are vulnerable and marginalized. Our ancestors, through the inspiration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of our Creator, our ancestors chose to see that experience in a way that would make them kinder and more sensitive people. It was ultimately a choice to follow that mitzvah of the Zacharta, remember that you were strangers. And certainly in the current climate, where we see that there's so much tension, racial tension, gender tension, for us to be able to draw on the lessons of our vulnerability historically and through this pandemic, to be more mindful of the equality that all human beings deserve, I see as a very positive and hopeful. So moving backward, I believe we have Rabbi Polikoff.
Thank you, Rabbi Stecker. So I agree with you, and I agree with so many of my colleagues here on this call. As I've mentioned before, one of the things that has been most meaningful to me has been the opportunity to disconnect from Zoom, to disconnect from that 24/7 virtual contact. But I want to share with you just something very challenging that happened to me last night, maybe happened to some of you as well. And that is following Shavuos, the 2 days of Shavuos, one of them which was Shabbos. I've pretty much been in my own world. And I think that that's part of that being in my own world is a productive silver lining to this cloud of COVID. And I was able to stay up for most of the night and learn and try to be up to greet the new day with davening as B'nai Yisrael didn't do so many years ago. And the Tikkun Leil Shavuos that we have, which is a tikkun, a repair for something that didn't happen so many years ago, is for me a motivation to try to repair things within myself that need to be repaired. So I was feeling actually pretty good about myself at the end of Shavuos. I had managed to resist the servings of cheesecake that graced the table, and was feeling relatively good about myself. And then I turned on my computer. I turned on my computer and saw that the world was different, Motzei Shavuos, than it was when I turned off my computer Thursday afternoon. There's a part of me that's grateful that I didn't know that. But there's a part of me that is shaken to the core as to what happened over those 2 days. And the images, I grew up in Philadelphia. Some of you might know that. I grew up in Philadelphia. The images of what was going on in what we call Center City in Philadelphia, streets that I used to walk as a young man, as a child, seeing what was going on in our own beloved New York, seeing what was going on in cities around the world, literally from east to west, created such a feeling with me of desperation. Because even if we are one day going to be able to grasp the medical solutions to this pandemic, whether it's by a vaccine, Yirtzeh Hashem should happen quickly, whether it's by a consistent and effective line of medical treatment. And I agree with everyone that my yarmulke is off to our medical professionals, to our first line responders. And I have to tell you, I'm very grateful to my colleagues at Temple Beth El, because I don't get out of the house that much these days. And I needed something from my office, and I left my house and to go to my office. And as I made the left onto Old Mill Road, I saw in front of me this sign that Temple Beth El had put up. And I said to myself, what an amazing idea. So Baruch Hashem, we were able to put up a sign as well. And I know Young Israel has a sign also. And I know Temple Israel has a sign also, thanking these first responders. To me, that sense of Hakara Satov, of gratefulness, is something which is an outgrowth of this. Rabbi Lerner mentioned the tremendous chesed. We have a WhatsApp chat. It's called GNS Chesed WhatsApp. I have yet to post something on that WhatsApp chat and not have a response within 30 seconds. I don't know what people are doing with their phones all day. Maybe they're just holding them like this. But I post someone needs shopping, within 30 seconds, there's a response. I'm going, and then multiple responses. I'm going now, I'm going at 2, I'm going at 4. People are possessed with this desire to help out and to do chesed, which is a wonderful thing. But I'm fearful that even when we overcome this pandemic from a medical perspective, we are going to live with the scars of this pandemic for a long time. The scars of unemployment, the scars of businesses that have unfortunately been lost as a result of this, the scars of financial ramifications that have been had here, and the scars of a country that literally seems to be torn apart. One of the things that we as a Jewish community stand for is that it doesn't matter whether you're the melech, whether you're the king, whether you're the nasi, whether you're the prince, whether you're a zaken, whether you're one of the members, the elders of the community, that we all stand equally before the law. That it's prohibited to judge a person with any deference. That we all need to stand before the law. And to me, that when I turned on the computer, Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Yom Tov, became a very powerful reminder of that principle.
Thank you. Rabbi Lerner.
I have to say that I'm also worried in terms of what this whole huge amount of time is going to bring us. You can see it going in one of two completely opposite directions. I can imagine a lot of people who, having not been going regularly to shul to daven, certainly on Shabbos, even people during the week, that they got into a different routine. And I'm not so sure that they're going to be able to easily jump out of that routine and go back to the much more demanding obligation. And on the other hand, as I had said before, I think people are craving the social interaction with one another, and maybe that would encourage them. But I think that it's a dangerous time for us, and that we as rabbis have to try very hard to use our influence and to try to make sure that we don't sustain significant losses. We've already had horrible losses, horrible losses because of all the deaths that have resulted from COVID. And so I think it's a very, very challenging time for us. We have to figure the ways in which we can try to reinvigorate people and make them realize that this was just a terrible tragedy. And if we've been able to survive and been blessed with health, that we have to show that gratitude to Hashem, to God, and we have to reestablish the cohesiveness and strength of our congregations and all of the obligations that we carry as a community to do what we can to strengthen the Jewish people, to be there for the land of Israel, and not to allow this to have taken the wind out of our sails and to knock us down. And so it's going to take, I think, a lot of hard work on our part to try to be inspirational, to try to convince people that they have to get past what was a crushing blow for all of us, and to try to really rise, and as we say, not only regain the position that we had before this struck, but to go mechayel el chayel, to become even further energized, to go to higher levels and to reach greater achievements, and to make the Jewish community here and all over the world, and certainly the strength of our homeland in Eretz Israel, better than it's ever been. That is our very, very big and daunting challenge.
Shakar. Thank you. I just want to take a quick opportunity. As many of us know, Rabbi Lerner is going to be retiring, and the extraordinary role that you have played in our community as just a paradigm of what it means to teach Torah and to live by Torah has created an incredible legacy here. And obviously, you will continue to be rabbi to all of us and to so many. We are appreciative of your participation in these dialogues, and kol hakavod to you. There's so much more that needs to be said, but in this setting among our colleagues and friends, I really just
very much appreciate it, Rabbi Stecker. Thank you for your generous words. We are going to miss this. You should know that Abby and I are very depressed by having to pack up a house that we've lived in for 41 years that's filled with a lot of clutter and untold numbers of sperm that we don't know where we're going to put because there's no room there in Israel, but also depressed because we love this community and it's been our home. It's a place where we raised our 4 wonderful daughters, all married with children. And it's not going to be easy for us to say goodbye to Great Neck, believe me. Very, very, very difficult.
You will always have a home here. I know I speak for so many when I say that.
Thank you.
Rabbi Speldman. Hopeful, blessing.
Yeah, there's actually so much. I didn't get into the rabbinate for the big catered affairs and standing around in fancy clothes and all the stuff that comes with moments of communal connection that is extra, that is fluff. And I think that this time has brought us to a simplicity and a vulnerability to be, it's like a kabbalat panim, a receiving of the faces. Literally, we're looking at people head on when we might have just seen the back of their heads. We're looking at people in their interior spaces, and there isn't the haircut, and so all of the extras in a way have been stripped, and that vulnerability. It is a Sinai vulnerability. We were vulnerable at that moment and able to receive truth in a new way, and I have felt that. With all of the loss and the fear and the burdens, there's been a liberating vulnerability and a sense of, oh, right, this is what matters. This is what matters. And there's an agileness to being with all of the Zoom fatigue. You can quickly get there. And so here we are with, being a Reformed Jew, in some ways it's exhausting with all the Zooming, even in our sacred moments. And in some ways it's so phenomenal. We're able to be with people at their Shabbat tables. And I mean, that is my rabbinic dream, to have families with their children sitting together at a meal and to be able to guide them through those moments and be present for them. And in a very Hamish way has been spectacular. So and to get challahs to them, we've done all this outreach, just as you've spoken about, the chesed, the well springs of goodwill, through calls, through shopping, through delivering Shabbat candles to their houses. There's just been, the vulnerability has enabled a creative and heartfelt surge of connection. And not only within our community, to our local hungry people. I mean, as I think about my vulnerability in this time, I am so aware of my privilege. I mean, okay, we got a dog and I did a lot more Zoom meetings and I had more family time. That is not what so many of our local neighbors are experiencing in this time. And I think another one of my prayers is, as I am aware of my own physical vulnerability, may that stay really sharp, whether it's because of my white skin or because that I can work from home. May I know what it means to feel vulnerable, and may I use that as a fire. The magnifying glass, you can light a piece of paper when you hold a magnifying glass on and the sun rays. So I want that fire to be one for tzedek within my own community and beyond.
Beautiful. But
let's see if we can keep simple and agile the way we are now, and not get cluttered with the stuff that doesn't matter so much.
Great.
This has been a time of such contradictions. It's impossible for there to exist one moment in which there's so much loss and so much death and so much pain and so much suffering, and at the same time so many great moments that would have never happened in our home, for example, would have never happened without it. And I guess it's not impossible. One last thought I'll share. I think that of course, God willing, congregants come back to the synagogue. They feel like, yes, we want to invest in the synagogue, and we have a spiritual, emotional, religious yearning, and people come back. That's a hugely important goal. But I think that even higher than that is the goal of us as a Ish Echad Lev Echad, that we as Jews are able to be like one person with one heart. And prayer and all of the ritual that we do in our synagogues is critical for that, critical for our synagogues and for our movements. But my own very strong view is that if we were to all be working on creating Ish Echad Ish Echad Lev Echad, that we are able to actually honor, dignify, love the fact that there are different ways of bringing Jews closer to God and to tradition. All of our synagogues would benefit from it, and mostly we as a people would benefit from it. So that's my prayer. It's also a very strong fear that this sort of both tragic and blessed moment will be wasted, because we'll go back to what was an old normal and not aspire and demand of ourselves a new vision, a new reality.
Right. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our precious time together. Rabbi Schweber, if you can give us perhaps one question that we don't all have to answer, but if we have something that we would like to share, we'll just have a quick response and then we'll conclude.
People have talked about this new normal. We don't quite know how long this new normal is going to last. And there is sufficient debate, I think even within the medical community, about how we could sort of slowly open the faucet, shall we say, to use that as a metaphor. Are you, as rabbis, willing to start to open up a little bit, even if it means excluding people, perhaps the people that are more vulnerable, people over a certain age or with pre-existing conditions? Or should we wait for all of us to be able to come safely together before we reopen?
Okay. Not what I would call a simple question. I believe we have all referred to this in various ways over the course of this conversation. Just a couple of us, if there's anything that we want to add in that regard at this point.
It's a great question. We struggle with it. We hope, with God's help, to resume. That's a bad word. Every time I say that word, it bothers me.
Resume, nice.
Right, correct. But to start minyanim again, in a very limited sense, beginning this coming week, following the guidelines of the Orthodox Union and the Rabbinical Council of America, that we have deliberately waited for 2 weeks after the political powers permitted us to come together. We hope to be starting this week. By definition, these minyanim will be exclusive because we are only limited to 10 people as per the governor's executive order. Those minyanim will be in the parking lot. It will be with social distancing and with masks, and people will have to pre-register. And as part of the pre-registration, which is done primarily for contact tracing, as part of the pre-registration, if you are over 65 and you want to come, you need to acknowledge the increased risk for doing that. We struggled with that. Our initial thinking was, no, if you're over 65, you cannot come. And that changed with discussions to how can I bar someone from coming to a minyan if it's within what I am legally allowed to do. And so we gave people the option to choose if they are vulnerable and want to come, to acknowledge that vulnerability. It's not the job of the shul to make personal decisions for you. You are entitled to make your own personal decisions. We will prohibit anyone who has any signs of illness from coming. Not exactly sure how we're going to do that. The simple way is that we're not going to allow them to register, but if they show up at the parking lot, I'm not sure what we're going to do. But we are struggling with this. It's important, we believe, to get back to Tefillah B'tzibur, to get back to communal prayer. And even the people who will be zooming into that communal prayer, and we believe there will be many who will still be zooming in, the whole context will take on a different form because there will be a minyan, there will be Tefillah B'tzibur, there will be Dvarim Shebekidusha, there will be Kaddish. People will have a different kind of connection. So we're going to begin slowly. We're going to begin with 1 minyan a day, then we'll go up to 3 minyanim a day. It will all be out in the parking lot. And when our physicians feel that it is appropriate and when the government officials give us permission, then we will consider moving inside. But as I think all of my colleagues have said, our prime concern is going to be pikuach nefesh. You're not going to do anything that is going to jeopardize in any way the health and safety and well-being of our community.
Thank you. I'll just a brief word about that. I mean, first of all, Rabbi Polakov, to you and to your colleagues, I mean, really kol hakavod. It is so clear to me, knowing you and knowing so many of your Orthodox colleagues, how exquisitely complicated a balance this is. The desire to be back in a physical space, to be able to do Tefillah B'tzibur, public prayer, but also the extraordinary mindfulness of pikuach nefesh, of human safety above all else. Briefly, we are most likely going to continue some form of virtual Tefillah gathering, no matter what we decide in terms of a gradual introduction of tefillah that will take place in person. So that is part of the equation. And as I said earlier, we're also going to be considering our resources and our ultimate vision, which is a vision of engagement, as it is for each of our synagogues. And so that includes people of all ages, that includes people who are vulnerable and homebound for whatever reason. One of the things that COVID did for us is to require us to be mindful of people who are vulnerable, who are shut in ways that we probably should always have been mindful, and we were to some degree, but I think this intensified that. So it's going to be a process of considering how we might be able to gradually, with mindfulness of safety above all else, introduce in-person gatherings, but also using the virtual technology to try to ensure and to figure out the balance. I think that's going to require insight and compassion, working hand in hand. So there's always more to say, and I couldn't resist, by the way, Rabbi Polikoff, when you used the word resume and referred to the play on words. So there's a whole list of puns that have come out of this situation that none of us asked for. And I could not help it, but now I'm just going to succumb to the temptation. What do you call the first part of a Jewish service that's done virtually? Pesuke de Zumra. Okay? Thank you. So listen,
Howard, I'm missing that mute button.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's okay. I'm about to leave meeting, Rabbi Polikoff. So we're even.
And I just
Well,
want to.
Eingezumt. Sorry.
Yeah, eingezumt. Okay.
Rabbi Stecker, I want to reiterate a message, an expression of gratitude that you shared towards Rabbi Lerner. You are just such an extraordinary human being and Jew, and I feel so blessed to have shared a community with you and have built a friendship and an admiration that will travel with me through my life. And may you and Abby head off to Jerusalem and be with your, I forget the number of grandchildren and members.
High up there.
And, I mean, I think I know the number, but just with so much love and gratitude and appreciation and admiration, may you be safe.
Thank you so much, Meya. I will cherish all of our years of chavrusa together. Very fascinating conversations, really. I'm
going to jump in and add my gratitude and hakaras hatov, although I'm not happy that you're leaving, making me the oldest rabbi in Great Neck.
Is that true?
I believe. I'm not happy about that. I think, I don't know, the rabbis Feldman are looking a little bit
I think you're my junior.
I think that's correct. We can discuss it, but I will say, Rabbi Lerner, that if you're interested, I would consider Zooming you in next year as part of the dialogue. So.
I might consider it. This is a lot of fun.
Well,
You can't escape.
I am sure I'll have all kinds of fascinating stories to tell you about Eretz Yisrael.
Well, that's fine, but Rabbi Polikoff,
Yeah.
we should never
What?
All right. So it is.
We are very blessed to have a community where we can all respect each other and love each other and feel so close. It's
Amen.
very, very special, not to be taken for granted.
Amen. Absolutely.
Tremendous bracha.
So, folks, Tam v'nishlam. I simply will call this to a close, echoing that as difficult and as painful as it is for each of us, community leaders and all of us who are part of this extraordinary community to be going through this, Baruch Hashem, thank God we can go through this together and truly feel like we have the support of colleagues and friends and loved ones. So hopefully with strength, we will be able to move forward together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
joining us. Thank you to the men's clubs and brotherhoods. Thank you to my dear colleagues and friends. And so long, everyone.
Thank you.
This concludes our dialogue for now.